When Drew uploaded a video of himself saying all good things must come to an end, Salvage Hunters fans couldn't believe their beloved host, who had taken them on a wonderful journey hunting antiques, was saying goodbye. And you could understand why people were shocked. Drew had been the face of Salvage Hunters for over a decade, and thanks to hard work and an incredible relationship with the fans, the show had become an international treasure. So when 55-year-old Drew announced his departure in 2024, millions of fans wondered what had happened behind the scenes. Join us as we uncover what really happened to Drew Pritchard on Salvage Hunters. The highlight of Drew's unceremonious exit was the video that announced his decision. In the video, he stated, "They say all good things must come to an end, and the next series of Salvage Hunters, which we shot last year and airs in the autumn, is my last. So everyone take care. Thank you so much." The thing was, fans cared a lot more than Drew expected. This news had come without warning, leaving too many questions. Why would the man who built an empire just step back from the spotlight? Drew himself later explained that his decision to leave came from a place of peace and pride. He believed that the show had accomplished his goals and had gotten to a point where it didn't need him to remain at the helm of things. He added that for him, the many years of filming and traveling, in addition to the ever-increasing workload, had affected him. Not that he regretted his career. This decision was taken because he needed rest from it all. He admitted that he had been thinking about quitting for some time and felt this was the right moment to move on. Yet despite this seemingly good excuse, not everyone was content with the reasons the iconic host had provided. There were those who believed the decision to leave was motivated by a deeper and more complicated personal issue, which Drew himself wasn't comfortable sharing with the public. So to fully understand why he had made this decision, fans needed some insight into Drew's life. Fact is, Drew Pritchard is the definition of a self-made man. His parents welcomed him into a small house in the old town of Conwy in North Wales. They worked in a tiny corner shop to provide just enough to help them get by. Around this time, they weren't the only ones struggling. The bad economy was affecting everyone in the area, as jobs were disappearing and many families were doing so much just to get a little to survive the winter. Having stayed close to junk all his life, Drew began to see what most people called rubbish in a different light. This was thanks to his grandfather, who was a veteran of the Second Great War. He had smuggled things from Europe and told Drew stories about hidden treasures and lost history. For a young child, these stories caused Drew to dream of adventure, and he soon began to seek those adventures himself. Drew went through scrapyards and abandoned places, flea markets and rubbish piles, collecting old bottles. At the time, many people thought he was a weird kid until he was making some money, which he kept as pocket money at school. By the time he reached early adolescence, he already had a personal collection of war pieces and old coins that was worth real money. He even sold some of the extra items to earn small amounts for himself. He was also learning from his father, who worked as a signwriter and painted beautiful pub signs with real gold leaf. Drew began to fall in love with restoring old things. He began quietly taking tools from his father's work kit so he could fix the broken cars and bicycle. He was collecting so many parts for these projects that part of his home was beginning to look like a scrapyard. Not that this stopped him. Before he became a teenager, he had already repaired and sold items that made him some money. Even when a terrible flood hit their area and ruined basically some of their parents' stock for work, Drew was still all about salvaging what they could from the loss. Perhaps this was a nudge to what was to come later. In school, Drew's grades were bad. He would skip classes so he could explore old slate quarries. His teacher at the time even accused him of being lazy, but that wasn't the truth. The fact was that Drew was dyslexic at the time, and art was the only subject where Drew could express himself. He made drawings of old Victorian buildings that were so impressive that he won a regional award and a small cash prize. This success earned him some respect among his teachers and peers. Still, his first love was salvaging, and even when it proved dangerous, he still kept at it. There was an instance where he fell through the rotten floor of an old mill and broke his arm. However, for Drew, this danger was just one of the aspects of the job he had to face. He compared it to the paints his father used in his small workshop. The paints had lead in them and made his father's hands shake. Drew himself had often helped in the workshop, and had breathed in harmful fumes from varnish and old paint without an idea of how it hurt his health. As a teenager, Drew began working part-time at a car restoration garage in the nearby town of Llandudno. Even though the summer work paid little, he was learning how to repair classic cars. Within a short period, he had helped restore many cars. However, what he did not know was that the garage was involved in shady work. He had unknowingly been helping them restore vehicles with stolen parts. Eventually, the police raided the shop and seized a large amount of illegal goods. That moment was the breaking point for Drew. He decided to wash his hands off the garage. Fortunately for him, it was around this time that he repaired his first piece of old furniture, a simple oak chair from the early modern era. He eventually sold it for a small profit. Drew had saved enough money to buy proper tools for himself. In 1986, Drew found the item that cemented his decision to make money from junk. He found a dusty Victorian gas lamp buried under 2 tons of junk. Someone confirmed the lamp was indeed an actual antique from the 1880s, made by the designer William Sugg. With this confirmation, Drew was able to get the lamp sold for $50, and being a savvy businessman, he used the money to buy even more tools. Later that year, he salvaged 15 more items and earned about $400. But there was a problem. The junkyard he sourced from was full of asbestos, and he was afraid his health might suffer if he kept working there, so he stopped going there. But while looking for a better place, he spent his time learning from an old junk dealer who taught him more tricks of the trade. One trick Drew couldn't learn was how to convince his parents that he was choosing the right career. Despite the money he was making, his parent didn't support what he was doing, and when they argued about it, Drew packed a few things and lived in his van for a week, but that did not stop him. By 1987, he had made 50 deals that paid him over $2,000. This was at a time when youth unemployment in Wales was nearly 15%, and instead of wasting his life or turning to crime, Drew found a way to help himself. At 18, he fully entered into the world of antiques. He simply joined a stained glass restorer as an apprentice. The things he was asked to do were menial. He cleaned dusty vases and carried heavy doors. But he understood that those were all part of the learning curve. And he soon came to the understanding that this world of antiques had a hidden part, which was filled with so much more. Drew didn't go to college to realize this truth. Soon enough, Drew made his first solo purchase. He found a set of broken Georgian chairs and paid just $100 for them. He spent weeks repairing them, sanding, carving, and bringing them back to life. When he finally sold them for $300, it proved he was on the right path. Over the next few years, Drew worked on everything, whether it was a small cup, a stained glass window, or grand fireplaces in old houses. At 20 years old, Drew did something shocking. He took his old van and drove all the way to France to treasure hunt. He had very little money that barely covered his feeding, spoke no French, yet he found himself in markets in Normandy. There, he found rare Art Deco lamps and furniture for under $500. He somehow brought everything back to Wales. Even that was a risk, because he had no real paperwork and still had to convince the customs officers he wasn't a smuggler. Luckily, he was able to, and when he sold the items, he tripled his initial investment. That journey to France literally opened his eyes to a bigger antiques world. He began buying from other places too, gradually building a business network across Europe. But it wasn't all a bed of roses. Some of his deals went south. For example, in 1991, he lost about $500 after a shipment of French ceramics arrived completely broken. He didn't pack them properly, and everything had gotten smashed during the journey home. But Drew was a shrewd businessman and fortunately an artist too. Instead of throwing the broken lots away, he made them into mosaic art and sold them. The following year, Drew got a small stall at the Conway Market, where he sold mid-century furniture like old teak tables and retro chairs. He bought items, restored them, and sold them for a profit. And he had about 50 regular buyers at the time. He also continued working on stained glass restoration. Nothing was too small or too junky. He had learned how to spot value where others couldn't, and this was what helped him open his first showroom in 1993. Drew was only 23 when he opened his very first antique shop in Conway, after finishing a 7-year apprenticeship fixing stained glass. the same boy who was called weird because he spent his time in junkyards. When he opened shop, Drew had nothing but a $2,000 loan from the local bank. So as much as he was happy to have realized a dream, he now had to work harder to keep it. One of the first things he did was to look into forgotten art from buildings that were being torn down. And a good find was a condemned church in Holyhead, where he pulled out rare stained glass windows designed by William Morris. They were later appraised to be worth thousands. By the end of that year, he had earned a profit of about $5,000. Getting paid was the easiest part of that year. Drew had had to fight tooth and nail to preserve his reputation when one of his competitors tried to ruin his business by telling everyone he was incompetent. But that plan failed woefully, because not only was Drew competent, he wasn't one to back down. His shop only became more popular. People who were building houses or restoring old ones came to him for genuine, original pieces. He was so well known that by 1999 his little shop was a tourist attraction, and Drew was still looking for ways to improve. He began working with demolition crews all across the UK. When old buildings were about to be torn down, he bought the valuable parts before they were lost forever. This new system helped to make sure his collection increased. He didn't stop at stained glass or the antique table. He also began collecting huge wooden beams from barns and cast iron radiators from empty factories. By the end of each year, he was getting more than 50 tons of antiques, and you couldn't be housing that much and not attract attention. As the UK designers noticed, so did thieves in Conway. In the late 1990s, thieves broke into Drew's shop and stole items worth about $150,000. They used crowbars and had left Drew almost bankrupt. Insurance covered only around $800, but fortunately for Drew, the police found out that the thieves were locals, and they were able to recover less than half of the loot from nearby pawn shops. After that mess, Drew installed new security systems for about $2,000 and moved part of his collection to safer storage. He even started buying heavy-duty safes to sell. That same year, antique shop thefts in Wales rose by about a quarter. By the year 2000, Drew's business had grown a great deal. He had discovered a new passion for industrial salvage, like machine parts from shipyards in Scotland. His client was bigger, and he even had celebrities on it. His two assistants were handling more than 1,000 pieces each year. Drew was nicknamed the Junkyard Genius, and by the end of the decade, he was worth over $1 million. With his influence, Drew stepped into activism. He wrote an article called Salvaging Industrial Heritage, in which he explained how many valuable old machines were being destroyed in scrapyards. The article made national news. His voice helped change laws, and a dozen historic sites were saved because of him. His business also benefited greatly, as the number of physical customers rose by about 150% in only a few months. As physical customers increased, Drew ventured into the online antique trade. He began selling his items on an online auction site. This was a risk because at the time he went into it, the online side of the antique trade was full of fraud, and he almost got hacked, but he caught it before any damage was done. The risk paid off as Drew's online sales doubled that year. Then, in 2008, he restored a 50-piece Georgian furniture collection for a major museum in London. One chair from the year 1780 had a hidden compartment, and inside were letters from the American Revolution worth around $20,000. The entire project earned him about $15,000, and it got him noticed by producers at a national broadcasting company. And in 2011, Drew's life strolled into another dimension. The show Salvage Hunters aired for the first time on a television channel. The show became a hit on its very first night, and about 500,000 people watched the episode. From then on, the show only got better and better. By 2015, the show had reached 100 episodes, and Drew's net worth rose to about $8 million. However, he was having a crisis in his personal life. You see, Drew had gotten married to Rebecca, whom he met in the late 1990s. The union had quickly produced a child. Rebecca had officially joined her husband's business in 2005. She had left a successful fashion job in Hong Kong, where she used to earn around $80,000 a year. She had an eye for antiques just like Drew, and even undertook restoration work herself. This helped the business grow quickly. They even took their kids on antique hunting trips across Europe. Fans got to see the children bargaining, and the genius of blending fun with business worked together to make Salvage Hunters a success. Drew's marriage was looking like the fairy tale ending anyone could wish for. That was until it began to fall apart. In the middle of the 2010s, Drew began an affair with a woman named Amanda Thomas, who was married to his close friend Janice Bryn Thomas. They met at antique events and hid their relationship by pretending it was only business. Drew was married to Rebecca at the time, and the affair continued for about 2 years. Even when Amanda tried to end it, Drew kept sending her messages. Then the truth came out. Other women began messaging Amanda, telling her they had also been involved with Drew. Amanda finally told her husband. He had already noticed Drew's name appear on her phone again and again. This was too much for Janice, and he confronted Drew at a pub called the Liverpool Arms in North Wales. Drew had sent him a message calling him a coward, and in that pub, Janice ended up punching him. Drew fell to the floor along with whatever was left of his marriage. Janice was fined a little over £1,000 in court and was banned from all the pubs in Conwy. Drew did not press charges, but he was also banned from more than 40 pubs under the local pub watch rules. At this point, the viewership on Salvage Hunters was about 1 million, so Drew was a really famous face. While the scandal didn't affect the show, his marriage was gone. In 2016, he sold his old warehouse and moved part of his business to Gloucestershire. This was a major change because he had always worked in North Wales. The move was unstable since his marriage of almost 2 decades was hitting the rocks. He eventually got divorced the following year. On paper, the cited irreconcilable differences, but fans knew the affairs were the real cause. The former couple divided everything. Rebecca received a share of assets worth about $5 million, including a chapel they had bought and restored into a home. That property alone was worth almost $800,000. Rebecca made sure their children stayed stable, even as Drew moved to another city. He later admitted in an interview that he had been unfaithful. He said the pressure from work had become too much, and he made bad choices. For most people, this was like Drew saying the trees were made of wood. Some fans refused to accept his excuse for cheating, especially after it was revealed he had repeated it several times. However, despite the chaos in his personal life, Drew kept himself busy. He opened a new shop in Conwy, and soon visitors from everywhere began showing up. Around that time, he also started writing books, which he later released to outstanding success. It sold 10,000 copies in the first month and earned him about $50,000. The book confirmed what fans already knew. Drew Pritchard is a true expert, and this opened opportunities for new Salvage Hunters projects, including spin-offs about classic cars. Then it happened. Drew began quietly closing shop and even asked people not to visit anymore. Fans assumed he just wanted to focus on TV. Then he began to auction off most of his personal collection. There were more than 620 pieces, and the auction brought in more than $800,000. But for Drew, the sale was never about money. These items were what he called his old friends, and he said letting them go felt like letting go of parts of his own life. This was when most fans began to realize something was wrong. Then, in 2024, Drew left Salvage Hunters after more than 200 episodes. He said he was tired and needed privacy. He thanked the whole team, including Rebecca, who had helped him build the show from the beginning. But it was obvious what had gone wrong. Drew had lost his marriage, his wife, and his friend. The scandal had been exposed in full view of the public, and the image of himself he had spent decades painting had been smeared by none other than himself. This must have hurt him deeply, and standing before the camera to pretend it's not so wasn't something Drew wanted to spend the rest of his life doing. Despite what has happened in his personal life, fans would agree that Drew deserves his privacy. It takes nothing away from the brilliance of the junkyard genius, who pursued a dream until he stood at the highest point of its fulfillment, with nothing